listening to episode 170 of the Tennis Files podcast, Pro Strategies and Techniques with Coach Joel Myers. Welcome back for another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. My name is Mehrban, a former Division I college tennis player. And on the show, I interview the world's top pros, coaches, and experts to help you improve your tennis game. And today I have on the show Coach Joel Myers. And Joel is a world-class tennis coach in San Diego. He was a three-time collegiate All-American, a National Player of the Year in 2010, and is also a USPTA elite professional. And he was formerly employed by Tennis Australia as well. He coaches at the Coronado Tennis Center in San Diego, and you can also catch him at joelmyerstennis.com. And he has a lot of great comments and testimonials from Coach Peter Smith, Craig O'Shaughnessy, Paul Annacone, Dr. Mark Kovacs, Marcus Willis, Alistair McCall. So you know that if he is getting backing from these individuals, that he is a top-level coach and person. So it's really a great pleasure to have Joel on this episode. And we're going to talk about pro strategies, we're going to talk about pro techniques, and most importantly, how they apply to your game. And you're going to get some great insights from a coach who has really done a lot to help players, especially on his Instagram page, which is where I actually first encountered him. He's got almost 50,000 followers on there, which is no easy feat. And he has all these fantastic clips on technique and strategies and other things, analyzing the pros and what they're doing, how they're hitting the ball. And it's really enjoyable. And I've personally learned quite a bit from it. So we'll have his Instagram handle and all the links and whatnot, the show notes on the show notes page, which you can always check out at tennisfiles.com/podcast and click the episode of your choice. And then check out what I have typed on my keyboard. Nice keyboard, by the way, if I do say so myself. But anyway, no one cares about my keyboard unless you're a computer techie. But I want to get into this episode so that you can pick up some really great tips on how to improve your strategy and technique and how to approach the game better and fix your mistakes. So without further ado, here is my interview with Coach Joel Myers. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have Coach Joel Myers on the podcast. Joel Myers is a fantastic coach and player as well, which we'll talk about a little later on the show. And I've already told you a bit about his background in the intro and all that. But Joel, I just want to thank you for taking your time to come on the podcast, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man, for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And so, on today's episode, we're going to talk about pro strategies and techniques. And I've noticed a lot of really great content, especially on your Instagram page, about how to just really level up your techniques and little seemingly, small tips, which actually make a huge impact in our games. But I want to, applaud you too on your social following that we were just talking about earlier. And you have, nearly 50,000 Instagram followers, which is mind-blowing. I mean, I'm not close to that. But I feel like some of these traits of being a good tennis player could correlate with, your great following. So how did you build up your following on Instagram like that?
Yeah, I think it really started with me just doing drills with juniors and showing what they could do, and then learning a lot of and finding drills on Instagram and sort of using that as a tool. And I started just really sharing things I was learning and things that I knew, and from there it sort of grew. And then I did some other annotated videos, and I started getting into more video analysis, and people seemed to like it. And so I spent a little bit more time doing it. Now almost every other day I'll post a video or a tip, and it's just built from that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that consistency that you just mentioned is one big key for that. Was there any particular video that you feel really hit off with viewers? Is there any kind that you think is that your audience likes the most to see?
There was some comparison videos. I mean, there was any time that Roger Federer on Nadal is mentioned, everybody loves that. Everyone wants to know why their forehand or their serve is so good. And yeah, a lot of fundamental videos or comparison videos. So I have a few where I've broken down some technique of some players that the technique and the fundamentals are actually quite similar in some forehands or some serves that you wouldn't really otherwise, I guess, know until you see the video. But video has been huge to I guess help me to become a better coach, but also for my my players, because as you know, when you see yourself on video, it's not anything like you think. So it's always a bit of a shock when you see yourself on video. But comparing my players to some of the pro techniques and showing them they can improve has been really, really important. And I've been able to share that on Instagram, and people seem to really like it.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, I talk about using video a lot, and you're 100% correct. And like sometimes I think I'm hitting the ball great, flawlessly, and then I actually watch myself and I see, oh wow, I'm actually on my back foot, and I got this little hitch going on, and it's so it really helps improve yourself and your game. And it's curious with my guests, how you first ended up actually getting into tennis. Sometimes I get some interesting stories about that.
Yeah. So I played basketball when I was very young, and I had to make a change because I got heel spurs. So I ended up changing to tennis because it was a little lighter on my feet, and I was always really interested in the one-on-one aspect of tennis. I loved that if I won, it was on me, and if I lost, it was also on me. I didn't really like that about team sports where I could play poorly and the team could win, or I could do really well and the team could lose. So it basically was just a whole lot of me hitting on a wall, and I got pretty good at hitting on a wall. And then I started playing tournaments as a junior, and we traveled, and I ended up moving to Melbourne when I was really young for training, and I spent most of my time growing up at the National Tennis Centre there where the Aussie Opens played. And so I got to be around, see the best players in the world and be around some amazing coaches, and it sort of just ignited the passion to want to take it further. And then I ended up getting injured late in my junior career, and the next option was college. And then things sort of went really quickly. I accepted a scholarship over here at Point Loma Nazarene in San Diego. And then once I got a couple of years in, I realized San Diego is a pretty good place to be. And then I ended up starting my coaching business not long after I graduated, and I've been here ever since.
That's awesome, man. Curious, when you went to the tennis center in Australia and you were exposed to a lot of the top players, like can you name a couple of them that you can remember training with and seeing?
Yeah, we were always on the Aussie Davis Cup team. So Wayne Arthurs, Richard Fromberg, Leighton Hewitt, Marcel Pousis, these guys we all get to watch them really close up. And I think being able to see these pros really close up, you get a feel for, it's amazing how good they are, but also you feel like that's a goal and you can towards that. And I used to remember watching Agassi get to Melbourne very early, and he would practice with Brad Gilbert and always go out and watch Agassi practice. But in particular, one of the memories I had was watching him hit left-handed forehands. And I remember his left-handed forehand was unbelievable. You would think he was lefty if you had seen him do it. But it was just something that it's like, wow, they're so close. You're exposed to that. And I feel like if you are exposed to that, the goal isn't so far away. If you only ever see them on TV, I think it's tough because you don't appreciate the physicality and the hard work that goes into it. But you really appreciate how hard they work to get that good.
Love that, Joel. And speaking of the left-handed forehand, I'm curious, a lot of people say that to practice your two-handed backhand, you should hit some lefty forehands. Is there any correlation between how good your lefty forehand is if you do practice that and your two-handed backhand?
I think there is. I used to work on that a lot with my players, and then I sort of found a better way to teach it, which is more of once you set the racket head in the right position, it's more of a drop and a pull motion. And I found the analogy to be much more successful with my players, where it was more like you're dropping the racket head and pulling a rope through the finish. So you're not overemphasizing one hand or the other. I found that some players can get a little bit forced if they're just trying to work on the left hand, but I think it can be a really useful drill because you have to drop the racket head down, but you don't want to necessarily make a giant loop with the left hand to do it. It's a little bit easier to manage the left-handed forehand if you are just dropping the racket head and pulling anyway. But I found a better way personally for me and my players, so I started using that instead.
Very cool, Joel. And you mentioned, obviously, you've got the junior career, and then you played in college and got a scholarship there, and then you went on to coaching. But I've seen that you've coached at some very elite places like IMG and the Harry Hopman Academy. So where did that all fit in? What was the progression between then and then, your coaching business?
So I trained there. I trained at those places. I didn't coach there, but
okay, got it.
I picked up a lot of training techniques and information from all the places that I went. I was exposed to so many different coaches. Pat Cash was one of them. Jose Higueras was one of them. But I really remember just all little drills and little tips. And I didn't have any specific private coach that I worked with. So I would take in all the information from everybody. I would try it out for myself, and then I would keep what I liked, and I would discard what I didn't really like. So if it works for me, I kept it. But I do remember a lot of different drills and strategy stuff, and it's helped me not only in my playing, but also in my coaching.
Very cool, very cool. And do you remember, well, you do, but can you tell us about like one or two of those little drills or pieces of advice from those great coaches?
For sure. So one of them that comes to mind was when we were at IMG Academy, and it was a very windy day in Florida. And I remember we did a drill where we slice approached into the wind. Everybody on the windy side of the court was working on slicing into the wind, because the opponent down the other end would have a lot of trouble with a lob if they had to lift it. It was very windy. So I specifically remember thinking that's really smart, to use the conditions to your advantage. Not so much approaching with the wind at your back, because the lob is easier and the pass is easier. So that was a very small one that I picked up. I do remember also when I was at Pat Cash's Academy in Queensland, we did some video work on my serve, and he showed me that I had absolutely no load in my back leg, and I thought I had a good serve at the time. And this is when you would take a video, and then maybe a week later you would set a time to go and review it. It's not like today where you look at your phone and you can show your student right away what's going on. So I remember he took a video of my serve, lined all the loaded position against Sampras and Goran and players that were sort of taller as well. And he just showed me where my leg wasn't loading. I was probably able to add maybe 20 miles an hour to my serve based on that. So there are a couple of things that I remember, and it sort of sticks with you when you have some success or something like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Huge tip there. And I remember interviewing Dr. Mark Kovacs.
Yeah.
Who's a great, expert in your physics, your physical abilities, and he's a sports science expert basically. And so he was talking about loading the back leg, and that was really, really huge. With that, was that an easy fix for you? Did you have any mobility or any issues like that where you had to work on to be able to load, or was it just okay, now I need to load, I didn't know that or didn't realize it, and then that's it?
It took a while. So actually, Pat's cue was to stick the left hip out, and that was what I was working on. I think if you know any of Mark's work, he says that cue is a little bit misleading, and you should really think about loading the right leg, which makes more sense. I sort of figured it out through trial and error. I was trying to really stick my hip over the baseline. But if you do load your back leg correctly, your hip will come out. So that's sort of an effect. Sticking the hip out is an effect of loading the right leg. And so I got there eventually, but it definitely was difficult. A change like that was hard to make when you've done thousands and thousands of reps. But I think exaggerating makes the biggest difference. When you think you do something, you're probably not anywhere near it. So you've got to keep exaggerating.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's something I've also noticed for myself, and it makes a huge difference. And I have a tendency to put too much weight on that front foot sometimes. But I guess on the topic of the serve, Joel, since I wanted to talk to you a lot about technique, personally, did you have any other significant changes on your serve technically that really made a big difference as well?
That was basically the only one. I spent so much time mimicking pros. I didn't have a lot of one-on-one coaching. I was in group environments, in academy environments. So I got to play a lot of great competition, but I didn't get a lot of one-on-one attention to detail. So that's what I'm big on now as a coach. But I did a lot of serving when I was growing up. I didn't always have somebody to play with, and it was sort of over trial and error. And I remember I really went after my serve all my junior career. I wanted to hit it huge. So I spent a lot of time doing that in the practice court. But the biggest probably change that I can remember making is definitely that loading of the back leg. That was the biggest one that I remember. Everything else was sort of more natural to me because I did spend a lot of time watching. So I sort of modeled my serve more off Mark Philippoussis, and which was a nice serve to try and copy. But he had a monster, and he was around, and that's what I was coming back to earlier, is when you can see a guy like that serve from 10 feet away, you really get a feel for how do they do it, and you just go out and I was sort of mimicking that.
Very nice, very nice. And so when players go out on the practice court and they serve, which I mean is huge, it's so crucial to do that, is spend time on the shot that you're hitting half the time to start the point. At least in singles. Were there any like mistakes that you made? Like, I'm just wondering of like what is the proper process to take like when you are serving? So if you could enlighten us on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that I try and get my players to work on is one specific serve at a time. I mean, I think we can get caught up in trying to hit all the spots. I think if I had to go back and retrain myself, I would have spent a lot more time on one specific serve at a time, and built that as a real strength, which would have allowed me to then open up the other serves. If you can be good at all locations, but maybe not great at one. And if you can start and really build on one spot, you can build strategy off that. So, have a primary target on the juice side, have a primary target on the ad side, and really nail those down. And then from there, you can go back and add more tools to the serve. Maybe it's more a different spin. Maybe it's more pace to an area, but you definitely have to have one go-to serve that when you're coming up to the line, and it's a big point. That's the one you're going to go with. That's your best chance to win the point. So I think that to me is a very important distinction, not just going out there and hitting a million serves at random targets, but to really be detail orientated and spend some time on one at a time.
Love that. Great stuff, Joel. And I'm just curious too, I mean, how many serves generally were you hitting per practice session on your serve?
I would take a big basket and probably spend an hour and a half. And that's probably too much time. I know that some specialists have said that you don't want to overserve your arm out, and they recommend around 100 serves a day, 100 to 150. So if you play a match, a 3-set match, you're probably looking at serving maybe 150 times. So if you take that into account and you go out and practice, probably around 100 serves a day is what you want to target. It's a lot, and I know juniors probably shocks a lot of juniors, but it is such a huge part of the game, and you can't hide a weak serve. It's you can hide a lot of other shots, but you definitely can't hide a weak serve.
Yeah, 100%, Joel. So with the ground strokes generally, is there a particular mistake technically that players just make that actually apply to all strokes? Like just, one example, let's say like, their hand position or their rotation or something like that applies to all the strokes. Like, is there something that you see with your students that you can talk about that a lot of them make mistakes on?
Yeah, I think in general, and I mean, this is really generalizing, but contact point is going to be the most important thing on a ground stroke or a volley. And it doesn't really matter how you get there. I know a lot of people talk about WTA forehand or ATP forehand.
Yeah.
If your contact is excellent, then you can take the racket around the body. If you're really struggling though, if you hit the ball late, if a deep ball or a ball with pace pressures you and you often hit it late, or you can't do what you want with the ball, then you have to consider shortening the take back up or changing the way you set up for the shot. But the most important thing is that you're able to make good, solid contact and put the ball where you want it. And so I find that players, when the ball is very deep, they take the same size take back, and they'll end up having to lean backwards, or they'll have to move backwards towards the back fence in order to keep that same size take back. Where really good pros will just shorten the take back up. They'll minimize it, make good contact, and neutralize that ball. So contact is very important, and I think that's where it doesn't matter what type of style of forehand or backhand you're in, that's, if you can make really good contact, I think that's going to be your most important part of that stroke.
Yeah, really good one there, Joel. When I was hitting with my friend Victor on Saturday, he was having trouble with his forehand volleys, and I noticed that it didn't, like, the contact point for him where he was hitting, it seemed off. So he wasn't, hitting very good shots on that particular stroke. So how do you find that proper contact point? And then is it different depending on your grips and depending on the shots?
Yeah, it's definitely dependent on the grip, and everybody's grip is slightly different. Some people are on Eastern or semi-Western or Western, and some people are in between those grips. So it's a really personal thing, but your footwork is related to that. You want to make sure you're moving your feet to get an optimal contact, but you still are going to have to change the size of your take back at a really high level. I mean, I think I posted recently a video of Del Potro where he's hitting two forehands, one that's very close to the baseline. It's off a deep ball, where he has a very short take back compared to his normal, monster hammer take back, where the ball is shorter. But it just goes to show that players must change the size of their take backs, and you'll see that a lot of times when they move from the French Open to Wimbledon in that 2 or 3 week period where they're getting off the clay and onto the grass, and they have to shorten the take backs because the ball skids through. It's a little faster. So, that's something that players have to keep in mind. If they want to play closer to the baseline, if they want to maintain their core positioning, then they're going to have to be very good with that. I think you can think of like a Roger Federer, for example, can play very close to the baseline because he can minimize those takebacks and just stay where he is and use the pace of the incoming ball.
Got it. So for a player who's just kind of stuck in, they have the same exact take back, the same exact length and tempo, like what is the solution? I mean, do you just play around and practice? Like, any insights on how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you can, to minimize the take back, to make them hold their positioning better, you can set up some markers behind the baseline, and maybe it's 3 or 4 feet behind the baseline. You can play some points out or rally, and you don't allow that player to back up. So they have to prepare earlier. They have to shorten the swings. So that's one way to do that. Another way is to play points out where you're not allowed to go behind the baseline at all. That'll make you shorten the swing up even more. So, if you're not thinking about going deep into technique, then you can play lots of different games where you're sort of handcuffed into doing the things that you have to in order to make that technique happen, like shortening the swing. But, that it's something that you need to think about is am I taking too big of a swing when I should be just shortening it up? Very similar to a return. Players go big on the return swings when they really shouldn't.
Gotcha. And really good stuff there, Joel. Again, this is, I don't know if this may be like a really tough question to answer, or maybe the answer is it depends. But if you were to create like the ideal player, I mean, how much spin would they be hitting? Like, what type of grips would they have? What type of game would they have?
Yep.
Like, I'm curious about your insights into the, like, the ideal player to be able to handle, today's game.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think you got to start with the serve and return. I think you'd have to have a serve that's a weapon. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a huge bomb, but you have to be able to hit spots. You have to be very solid on the second serve. I think you need a distinct weapon from the ground, and the forehand seems to be the easiest one to generate pace and spin. You'd want a player that's rock solid on return, that misses very few return mistakes. And then you need somebody who's comfortable coming forward and looking to transition and put pressure on. But, I think something in general that I come across all the time with players of all levels is that when they're behind the baseline, even really good players, they still hit really low on the net. And it's something that it's really common, surprisingly common with good players. And it means they make more mistakes, they drop more balls short. And then when the ball ends up on the other player's racket, it's more in their strike zone because it's not rising and pushing them back. So that's something that I've just noticed. The margins are probably not high enough with most of the players that I train.
Gotcha, Joel. And does that necessitate that we hit just with more spin, we hit with more top spin, or can you actually even achieve that if you hit a flat ball normally?
Yeah, so I mean, I think trajectory wise, no good player hits a flat ball, totally flat ball. They all have spin. It's just more of the trajectory. I think when people say, a flat shot, to me that is a trajectory thing. It's not a spin thing, because you can't control the ball without spin. But I think that the best players use their legs to get a lot of power from the ground, and they're able to play above the net when they're behind the baseline in order to push their opponent back, and that way they don't have to go to smaller targets on the outside. As I think we all know, we've all played somebody who probably hits down the middle really deep, and it's very hard to do anything with that ball. So targets are huge, but it definitely makes it easier when you use more spin. It's very tough to be consistently hitting deep when you have a flatter trajectory.
Got it, Joel. Yeah, I was especially curious about, your take on how much spin we should be hitting and all that, because I think I remember, I forgot if it was a commentator or a fellow player, that they were commentating on Mackie McDonald, and they said, oh, like I think he has a really good future on the tour, and especially because he hits the ball really flat. So I wasn't really sure, why that could be the case. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think if you step up inside the baseline and the ball is higher, you can flatten it out. It's situational. I mean, you could say Del Potro hits a flat ball, and he definitely does when the ball is above the net. But you slice the ball down low below the net, he's going to have to roll it. It's not possible to hit it flat. So I think that is more a trajectory thing than a spin thing. And I think sometimes players, when they watch TV, they see how hard these guys hit. Their only chance to hit similar speeds is to flatten the ball out, and it's just not as consistent, and they can't hit their spots as well. So when the ball is there to be hit, it's above the net, you're inside the court, you do have to drive it. But I definitely think when we think of flat, it's more trajectory than it is about the spin on the ball.
Gotcha, Joel. So, I mean, with that in mind, where we do need to definitely be able to flatten out the ball as well as hit spin on the ball, are there any negatives to the Western grip, especially long-term, maybe as you get older, is that maybe too extreme of a grip for players overall, or do you think that's still a viable option?
No, I mean, it can be. I think it's from, I had a Western grip when I was very young, and it was it's something I'm very glad that I changed, because I ended up being 6'6", so that's a problem when the ball's down low. But I'll tell you where there's a real weakness on a Western grip, and that's an out wide return on the deuce side. When that ball gets out wide, it's very, very difficult for a Western a guy with a Western grip to get the ball back in play. And also a lot of times they have to change to a much more extreme backhand grip. So there are pros and cons to all grips. But, I don't teach Western. I start players in semi-Western and let them gravitate towards Eastern, or a little bit over towards semi-Western, but it does make it a little bit harder to drive the ball when it's there to be hit. So, but it does make it easier to get spin early on.
Yeah, that's a great insight, because you made me think of myself, because hopefully my opponents aren't listening, but when I get sliced out wide, it's tough for me sometimes, because I have it's like a little tilted more towards the Western. So, and for my forehand, so when I have an out wide return, it's kind of tough. I have to kind of like flick it almost sometimes. So it is, pretty difficult as well. And those low balls also are tough too. So, that's really good stuff there. So in regards to, like, say if a player, they have, a few technical flaws in a particular stroke, like what's your approach for going in and fixing that stroke to make it technically sound?
I mean, yeah, the first thing is like, what's happening with it? Is it just hemorrhaging points? Is it a real problem that needs fixing? Sometimes it can be a decent technique and they just need to manage their game better. So you see a lot of players, they want to hit their backhand just like their forehand, but the backhand makes a ton of errors. So they need to make a change in how they approach the strategy from that side of the court. But, if there's a real glaring technical deficiency, then you have to go and spend some time restructuring it, and that can take a bit of time. Or you need an option if you're going to still compete. So if let's say it's a backhand, then you need to have a slice that can, if you have problems with a topspin, then you've got to have a slice that you can use as a substitute. But I think it's really important that if there is a glaring problem, that you go to fix it. And if there's not, maybe they just need a different way to think about how they're using that stroke on the court.
Gotcha, Joel. And how about what's a good process for planning before a match? I mean, a lot of players, I think they just end up, showing up on the court and then trying to problem solve later on if they do at all. So what are some tips for us to properly prepare for our matches?
Yeah, I think the biggest tip that I give to my players when they go into play is just to focus on the tennis. I mean, there's a lot of times players go in and they really worry about winning or losing, really. I think that affects everybody. They think they get a first round, they got to win the first round, or they've got to beat this player to get a UTR, and they stop focusing on what they need to do to win. And we should have a good performance and play good tennis. And I found that, using visualization and thinking about the strategies and having a plan, and whether you write that plan down. I have a lot of my players actually go in with a notepad and pen, or they have a written guide, and these are the things that you're going to work on, and these are the things you're going to try and execute, and you're going to do your best to do that. And if you lose, that's fine. But it's very hard, especially with junior tennis, because I think kids feel so bad when they lose. That they sometimes just, that's what they focus on is that they don't want to lose, or they need to win. But I think that's really probably the biggest tip, is to really focus on the tennis. What type of tennis do you want to play? Go out and try and play that tennis. So you shouldn't be happy coming off the court if you just spent 2 hours moonballing your opponent to death. Maybe you would have been better to lose that match going for your shots, and maybe you're better for the next match for that, because if you spend 3-4 years moonballing your opponents to death, that's 3-4 years wasted where you could have been developing.
Yeah, I love a lot what pretty much all of what you said there, and kind of reminded me of my junior days. I mean, I remember in particular, like just when I played certain players, like thinking about too many superfluous things, like if I lose, and they're gonna talk about me, and like I've always beaten this player, and I'll they'll make fun of me or whatever.
Yeah.
And then also I remember also in college where I was up 6-2, 5-1 in a Cornell Invitational, and it was my very first college match, and I was thinking, oh wow, it's gonna be great to win, and then obviously I choked and lost.
Yeah. And that's what happens to players, right? That's why players, they get up in the score, they get match point, and they think, oh, I'm at the finish line. And they stop actually focusing on, okay, where's this serve going? Where's this return going? Where am I going to hit the next ball? But because if you focus on those details, the winning will take care of itself, and it gives you the best chance to win. So it's very hard because, as tennis players, we have to be very aware of the score. But we also can't be so frozen by the score that we don't play our game. So that's what's really interesting about tennis. It always makes it interesting.
Yeah, and it's so funny too, because a lot of us, like, it's even just like USC league matches or whatever that we're like going crazy and getting nervous, and then you think about the professionals that they have, points on the line and hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, and they're able to focus, like you said. It's pretty amazing.
But I think that also comes into to the way that amateurs and the way that pros think of points is so different also. I mean, pros understand when they can take more risk based on the score. I think most amateurs probably play every point very, very similar. I also think that, pros they always think of 2 balls. They always think of the ball they're hitting, and they always think of the next ball. And amateurs, especially if you go down to, 3-5, 4-0 doubles leagues, a lot of times they're thinking about just making the ball they're hitting, and that's it. And you'll have these long extended rallies where nobody's poaching. If it's doubles, nobody's coming to the net. And it's almost like a badge of honor. I played a 4-hour doubles match today, and it's like, no, that just means you're in a pillow fight, basically.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, like I was at a sectionals tournament last year, and I was seeing these 3-0 maybe the women's player, not knocking on any particular division or anything, but it was just like the 2 baseliners were just hitting back and forth. The 2 net players were just watching, and
just not willing to take any risk. That's you have to take some risk, and if you allow the scoreboard to dictate when you take that risk, then it frees you up as well, because you have to understand that 30 love, when you're up 30 love, it's definitely different to when you're down 30 love. So you can't play every point the same. And if you and your partner, if you're a doubles player, if you and your partner talk about that, then you can sort of strategize and play better tennis.
Great stuff, Joe. So in terms of singles and doubles, I mean, maybe the answer is obvious, but is singles like a totally different game from doubles? What would you say?
Yeah, they're very different strategies. Singles, as I was saying earlier, you can play much higher above the net. You can sort of, the point can develop in definitely more ways typically than doubles. I think doubles, it's pretty set in what you're looking to do against your opponent. So one of the big keys to doubles is playing as a team and not playing doubles like singles, which means that the net player has to be more involved in the middle, which means that the serve locations are very different, for instance. And in singles, you're typically trying to pull the player off the court to start the point, but you don't do that as much in doubles, because if you go wide in doubles, you're opening up angle for return. So it is very different. There are some similar skill sets, and they definitely can complement each other, but it's just it's a whole different strategic animal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as a player, I played pretty much 98% singles, and I was mostly a counterpuncher, I'd say. It was a tough transition to doubles. And, with certain players, I would comfortably just chip back my returns. And then, if you do that, it's going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So most of the time anyway. So yeah, it's definitely a different game. How would you suggest players who are singles players adjust? Like, what types of things should they be doing to better acclimate themselves to the game of doubles?
I mean, for sure, like you just hit on it, like work on the return. The return is, it should be locked in hard and low over the net. And you have to be a little bit more aggressive with the return in doubles because of the danger of that net player on the first ball. So, you have to play closer to the baseline typically. You don't want to play super far behind the baseline, because if you do, you're not as effective. The net player can sort of poach, and the front of the court on your side is also a problem. But, you also have to work on your hands and being able to take pace when you're close to the net. If you're a good doubles player, they spend a lot of time very close to the net, close to the middle, and using the pace of a big ground stroke and redirecting it, or even absorbing pace. Some players really struggle at the net to absorb pace. It's a big part of being a good volleyer.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. And speaking of that, and again, obviously I'm not trying to act like I'm an amazing player. Like I struggle sometimes on, the back end volley in particular. And so you mentioned how like we should be able to absorb pace as a volleyer. And so I'm curious about, volleys in general, like some general tips that you can give us so that we can, hit better volleys. Because when you watch the pros, and even, yourself as well, you make it seem so easy when you're volleying. So I'm curious if you could kind of enlighten us as to maybe a few keys that commonly maybe amateur players make technical mistakes on.
Yeah, a lot of players don't use their offhand very well on most strokes, but especially on the backhand, it really helps to turn the shoulders. There's sort of three types of volleys. There's a wall volley where you're just using the pace of your opponent's ball. That's really common in doubles. The baseline player rips it at you, and you just basically become a wall and deflect it back at his opponent. His partner. There's also a cut volley where you're at the service line approaching. You've got to keep the ball nice and low, so you've got to apply some backspin to that ball and keep it skidding through the court. And then there's the catch volley where you're taking pace off the volley. And that's where you're trying to keep the racket head up and come around the ball and sort of angle off by using the opponent's pace. So there's some three main volleys there, and you've got to be proficient at using all of those. But I definitely think that using spin and being able to use the ball's force that's coming at you is very important. Leading with the edge is something that I get my players to do a lot when they go for their volleys. Not leading with a square racket face, so that would be a wall volley. But if I need to angle it or I need to take some pace off the ball, then I'll lead with the edge, that front edge. So if you're in a ready position, that edge that's pointing at the net, that's going to lead. And if you can get your feet to the ball as well, you'll be able to absorb some pace and find some angle. And that's a huge volley for singles, but also for doubles.
Gotcha, Joel. That's great stuff. With the volley, is there any other acceptable grip than the continental? Like, do you have any players who they have like an Eastern or something like that, and you just say, you know what, this looks fine, or do you always have them use a continental?
Yeah, look, it depends if it's a problem or not. I definitely have some of the ladies that I coach that will use a different grip on volleying, but they can do it fairly well. So, it depends on their level and their aspirations, but why would we change something that they can do well? And I think we don't need to change everything if it's working. Ideally, you would be in one grip for half volleys, overheads, anything up at the net in the front of the court. But if you happen to be able to do something very well and you don't need to change that, and you don't have aspirations to play at a very high level, then I think that's okay. But it really depends on your goals and level of competition, because as you know, you're not really going to get away with volleying like with a forehand grip if you're playing super high level, but maybe you will at a certain level of doubles or social tennis.
Yeah, that's a great point to kind of define your goals, where you want to be at, and then you might not need like amazing technique. You just use strategy and all that.
Yeah.
And as far as singles, Joel, I just want to touch upon maybe a couple of your favorite plays, like maybe if you had a playbook that you could kind of tell us a couple that are really effective, simple plays that we can just go out there and try to practice, and that'll be really effective for us.
Yeah, so one of them is called the 2-1. I think that's pretty common now, but it does work at every level, where you're going to pinpoint the player's weaker side and you're going to try and hit deep. The first ball goes deep to that side. The second ball, you would look to upgrade to your best shot. So for most people, that's a forehand. If you can hit the second ball with a little bit more direction and run them off again on their weaker side, it'll open up a hole on the other side, and that's where you go with the third ball. So it will be 2. Let's say I'm playing you and your backhand is your weakness. Then I would try and go deep to your backhand in the first one, wider to your backhand on the second, and now you're off the court and I have a hole to attack. And even if your forehand is your best stroke there, you're on the run to hit it, so you're not going to be as effective. And I'm probably going to be able to get a forehand on the next ball, which I can go back to your backhand. So that's a really good pattern to practice, is the 2-1 pattern. And sometimes you'll see it a lot in the pros, but sometimes it becomes a 3-1 if the opponent is a fast recoverer or you don't get the second ball wide enough. Sometimes it's a 4-1, but it's that's a play in singles that you should be looking to use a lot, actually.
Love it. That's really good. Actually, I did a strategy video maybe a few weeks ago or so, but I can remember the player. He had a deep backhand that pushed the player back, and then he went for a short angle backhand, and the player was way off, and then he had an easy winner. So that's a really good one there. Appreciate that. Also, just curious about maybe a coaching tip or two. Is there anything in particular where you've been coaching all these years now, like a philosophy or approach that you had initially that through a mix of experience and also maybe learning from other coaches and other sources that you actually maybe change that approach or ideology?
Definitely all the data that's come out on rally length has changed how I coach significantly. I used to spend a lot more time rallying ground strokes, and then Craig O'Shaughnessy, basically his data came out, and I've been lucky enough to become friends with Craig since about 2015, and so I've kept up with all the stuff that he's put out, which is amazing. But it's really changed, definitely how I approach practice, even for juniors going forward in their development, because we don't spend as much time doing longer rallies. We definitely work on the serve and the return more, even from a young age. And all of the technique that we do, we always give it a strategy theme. So if we're working on a backhand technique, then I've got to target up at, the middle of the ad court, for instance, and I told her or him why that we're doing that. So we can draw an error. So there's a lot of things that's changed in regards to the data and how I've approached coaching. But I think the thing that's remained constant for me is that you can't get better at everything every day, but you can get better at one thing every day. And that's been my sort of philosophy, is good, consistent improvement. And it's only little things, if you're having a tough day on your forehand, or your backhand, then let's get you better at the net on a volley. So every practice that you have, there's something that you've added to your toolbox.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I forget if it was Bruce Lee or somebody else who their quote that said, like, I fear the man who practices the one kick 10,000 times rather than somebody who practices, 10,000 different things, something like that. Probably butchered it. But yeah, I love that. So Joel, also we're just curious about, what you're doing right now. If you could tell us like maybe the programs that you're teaching and all that, and other things. I'll ask you after that, like how we can get in touch with you and all that too.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm based in Coronado in San Diego, and I'm basically right now I'm a private coach for a lot of top level juniors, a lot of doubles players and singles players, and we have some junior programs here that are running even during COVID at the moment that are open for enrollment. But yeah, so I'm doing my own thing. It's been really privileged to be able to coach so many very good juniors here at San Diego, and I'm looking to continue to do that. But that's my goal, is to really work on developing players. That's my passion, and I'm very lucky at the moment because I get to work with a lot of top players. So it's a great place to be here in San Diego. Have you ever been to Coronado?
No, I haven't, but I mean, I definitely want to go. I will.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Once you drive over the bridge, it's very lucky to be here in this spot.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out. I'm glad you're in such a great place. Yeah. So you've got joelmyerstennis.com, which I imagine is a really good place to get in touch with you. Any other places as well for us to be able to follow you and see what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can, I'm pretty active on Instagram. It's probably my main one. You can follow me at Joel_Myers_tennis, or at Twitter, I'm also on there as well. So it's Joel Myers Tennis. But I like to update stuff, like share drills I'm doing, players that I'm working with, and things that I'm learning. So I understand that this is a big learning experience, and it's something that I've been happy to share with people, and they seem to like it. So I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, I think they really like it. I mean, I was checking out your website, obviously, before the interview, and I saw, some amazing people commenting, basically giving you a testimonial, like Coach Peter Smith from USC, and then Craig O'Shaughnessy that we talked about, Paul Anacone, Marcus Willis, who played Federer in Wimbledon.
Legend.
Dr. Mark Max. Yeah, Alistair McCaw. So, yeah, impressive stuff, the way you've built everything up, Joel. And I wanted to ask you, too, about, interesting question, but if you were to be able to put up a huge billboard and, let's say in Coronado or any like huge city in California that would be seen by a ton of people, what would you write on it to tell people?
What would I write on a big billboard about myself or about tennis, or?
Just in general, like basically it would be something that you think would actually really help people, whether it's with tennis or just generally.
In tennis, I would say, and I like to remind my players of this, that if you win 55% of all the points you play in the match, you're going to win 6-3, 6-3. So that's on average. So be nice to yourself. Allow yourself that 45%, points lost, because a lot of people can't do that. They're too perfectionists for our sport. You really can't be a perfectionist in tennis. You got to be easy on yourself. Realize that 55% is a very good day. 3-3. I mean, we'd all take a 3-3 win over anybody. So, you understand that, and you'll be a much better tennis player.
Awesome. Yeah, I really love that. Yeah, I mean, we're not machines. You see people missing 2 shots in a row. They're going ballistic. It's like,
yeah. Well, I think, that's data that like Craig has, right? And so he brought it out that, almost every year it's like 55% of the points is what the world number one win, men and women. And then he put out the stat that I think it was Nadal wins 56% at the French Open. And you're just like, that's insane. He's won, 13 French Opens. He's won 56% of the points. It's absurd. So, if you're the type of player that struggles mentally on court, you can think about that differently. And it's not perfection you're looking for. It's 55%.
100%, Joel. So yeah, I mean, is there anything else that you want to just, let the audience know about, or give them wisdom about before we sign off? I guess I know you have a lot of stuff to do. You're a busy man. So anything else?
No, I think we covered it, man. I just want to say thanks for having me on. I've listened to many of your podcasts to get a lot of information, and you've been an awesome resource for tennis coaches and players. And I think everyone really appreciates that, because it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. So I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it. I mean, again, you do an awesome job. Like, you guys should definitely check out Joel Myers, tennis.com, and also definitely Joel's Instagram page, which we will link up in the show notes, because there is a ton of great videos and instructional videos where Joel breaks things down. I think there was one of the two-handed backhand that was really enlightening for me as well. And, there's tons of strategy stuff, and you're going to see a lot of these best players in the world, their technique getting broken down, and Joel hitting shots and teaching you as well. So
thank you.
It's really great stuff. And Joel, before we go, what is your Instagram handle again?
It's at Joel_Myers_tennis. So it's at Joel_Myers_tennis.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, Joel, thanks again for coming on to the podcast, and appreciate your time, and keep up the great work. And I'm sure we'll talk again real soon.
Absolutely. You too, Mehrban. Thank you.
All right. I really hope you enjoyed my interview with Coach Joel Myers. And Joel, big shout out to you. Really appreciate you coming on to the show today. And as I mentioned, all the resources and links that we mentioned on this show and on every show will be on the show notes page, which is at tennisfiles.com/podcast. And then just check out the episode of your choice. There'll be show notes on that page, as well as on the app that you're using to listen to the show. So if you are indeed clicking the play button on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify, if you actually look in those notes that I've beautifully typed for you, you'll see the resources and the links and a little summary of the episode. So please enjoy that. And speaking of which, I would really appreciate if you would leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast. It really would help me first and foremost know what I'm doing right, and maybe not as well on the show, and to hear what you think about it. And it would also help through the wacky algorithm of Apple Podcasts and other podcast apps to rank me a little higher, which is not just for vanity and my ego, which I am trying to lower. Ego is the Enemy is a great book, by the way. But in any event, it helps more people see the show, because when you leave reviews and you leave ratings and all that jazz, then it'll just rank the show higher, or at least that's what I'm told by the gnomes who work there. Just kidding. They're not gnomes. Please don't derank me. So that would be much appreciated. Also, I would love to leave you with a quote, as I often do at the end of the show. And today's quote is by Tal Lopez. And he said, "The penalty for procrastination is the loss of hopes and dreams." So imagine yourself, say you know that you have to practice your serve. You know that you have to, hit those topspin forehands. But you know what? Oh, let me just get that bag of Cheetos and that pint of Stella Artois. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Or Artois. It's a beer. And you just keep procrastinating on practice. And then, you know what? I don't make the, I was going to say high school team, but you can't drink at this point. I didn't make, I wasn't good enough for my 5-0 team, or I didn't win this tournament, or my forehand isn't where it wants to be. And, that's procrastination and choosing the easy route, which, if you make easy choices now, you're in for a harder life later on and a tougher tennis career. If you make the hard choices now, then your fruits of your labor will be realized and you will actually have a better tennis career in life. So go for the hard route. Lately, I've actually been trying to tell myself, like with David Goggins, who's he's a little profanity laced, but he says a lot of amazing things and has a great book called Can't Hurt Me. And he's programmed his brain to basically, whenever he has like the option of comfort or difficult choices, he always takes the hard route. And I find that the more I do that, the more I condition my brain to like and do harder things. And so that helps a lot. So it's still a struggle every day, but the more that you subject yourself to hardship and hard work, the more you're going to be happy with your tennis game and your life. So that's my mini preach. I hope you enjoy that. But yes, please keep trying to improve yourself at least 1% every single day by listening to my podcast, and only my podcast. Just kidding. You can listen to other podcasts too, and videos and all that. Check out my YouTube channel at tennisfiles.com/YouTube, and all the resources, and just, try to find the best resources you can, learn from them, but also importantly, don't get overloaded by a ton of information. I feel like this could already be a different podcast episode. Maybe it will be, but just pick one thing at a time to work on until you master it and it becomes second nature, and then go on to the next thing. That's what Joel said also on the podcast. So, okay, have a wonderful week. I hope you enjoy this episode. Again, give me feedback on it. Leave a review. That'd be really great and helpful for everybody. And have a wonderful time on the courts. Be safe, be happy, and hang out with your family if you can. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is Mehrban Aranshad signing out.